Good evening. Thank you for returning as we continue this series. When fathers hide their sins, they lose their sons. Tonight we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 13. 2 Samuel chapter 13. As just a little recap, what we have walked through, this is the fourth message in the series. We have seen these three things. First of all, you lose your faith. David starts to become somebody that he's not. This is what sin does. It makes us not look like the Lord. It makes us look more like the world. We begin to lose our future, all of the things that God does have in store for us. Those things just slowly seem to kind of slip away. And then we lose our family. Now, losing our family, last week we looked at, from a high level, Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah. Tonight we're going to look in detail at Amnon. Now, when we talk about lose your family, remember that the most impactful negative thing that you can do as a father, as a husband, as a parent, it could be a spouse, it could be a pastor. I believe, I don't have a Bible verse, a chapter and verse on this, but it's something that I've seen throughout the Bible. And it's something I've seen and experienced in my own life as I've watched leaders and men, myself. I've watched myself. One of the worst things you can do, and one of the things that gives you or seems to sap and take all of the power from you as a leader in your home, is a bad example. And that's what David, when he begins to lose his family, that's the number one thing that keeps him from really intervening probably the way he wants to intervene. He has set a bad example with Bathsheba. And what we're going to see today tonight with Amnon is David doesn't address this the way that he should, probably because the bad example brings a certain level of guilt. It brings a certain level of shame. It increases this awareness that you are a hypocrite. And this bad example, it begins to, once it's revealed that you are a bad example, it begins to just strap you, tie you down, and keep you from fulfilling what it is that you would normally do. So tonight as we look at Amnon, I want to talk about remorse over sin makes you want to. And then I'm going to give you four things here this evening. Self-control in an addicted world. We have very much in front of us today a world that is addicted to something. Maybe 40 years ago, the addiction was more prevalent in a way that it seemed to cause more immediate harm, in that alcoholism really showed its ugly head in abuse. But today, what we have is we do seem to have more fathers at home, more parents at home. Maybe our marriages are falling apart at the same rate, or even a higher rate, but there does seem to be an awareness. But what we have is not fathers at home who are engaged, but we have fathers at home who are disengaged. It's not about, although the presence does something, but if the presence leads you to a bad example, it really ties your hands. You don't really accomplish what you sought out to accomplish. So I think there was this idea in the past that you just need to be there. But it's more than just being there. That's the first step. The second step is being actively engaged. There was somebody sometime that said something to the effect of he came home and he was tired from his work day, and he kind of sat down and he checked out on his couch, and his wife came and confronted him and said, "Hey, don't come home and give your family second best." And I think there's a lot of truth to that. We do sometimes as men want to come home and check out, and boy, it's been a long day, and mentally it's a roller coaster, physically tired, emotionally not really wanting to be checked in with all the things that go on with parenting or being a spouse. What happens is we want to almost dive into this new addiction, this voyeurism of social media, where we turn into this robot of scrolling, and we can't get past what's the next thing. What's the next scroll going to show me? And we get so involved into it and so engaged into it that everything around us doesn't get any attention. And those people around us that don't get any attention start to form these certain bad habits, but also bad feelings. And then after days and weeks and months and even years sometimes of this addiction of social media, we begin to look back on the years that have passed us by and go, I've missed some things. And remorse sets in. Now, what we're going to look at today is a very different addiction. It's an addiction I think men still struggle with today in lust. But it has its damaging effects nonetheless. So let's read. I'm going to read chapter 13, verse 1. And I'm going to go down to verse 22. So we're going to read a little while. And I'm going to really spend a long time explaining what we're reading here. Because there's a lot that gets missed, culturally gets missed, because we're not Jews. We don't understand how these processes really worked. And so I'm going to try, as God allows me, to flesh out what is really practically happening here. So we start out in verse number 1, and it says, it came to pass after this. After what? After the birth of Solomon, after David and Joab take Rabbah, it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister, whose name was Tamar. So Absalom's this super handsome guy. The Bible tells us about Absalom, there's nobody in all of Jerusalem, all of Israel, that can compare to his looks, his stature. I mean, he is just what we would today say is a cover of GQ model type of guy. Not only that, but he's the king's son. So he's got all of this power to go along with his incredibly good looks. But he has a sister, and it says he had a fair sister. She's just as beautiful. She's just as beautiful of a lady as he is handsome of a man. And it says, whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now Amnon is David's firstborn. He's the oldest. And verse 2 says, and Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar. He literally, he sees the beauty that she has, and he's letting his imagination run wild, and these lustful desires are being conceived in his heart, and now he wants her so bad it literally is making him sick, physically making him sick, it says. So it says in verse 2, Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. That's a great price, of great value, purity, virginity. These are things that are almost frowned upon in our society today, but this is of great price. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. Now, the Bible is not saying that he thought that what he wanted to do was bad. The Bible is saying something very different from that. Within the palace structure, the daughters were located in a different part of the palace. The sons oftentimes would have their own apartment, and many times the daughters would all be housed in an apartment of their own. Maybe not individually, probably corporately together the daughters would be there, and the mother would be with the daughters during the day, and the sons would do their thing, and the father was probably not as engaged as David was. But nevertheless, it says that he thought it hard for him to do anything to her. What it's saying is, because the way that the virgin daughters were set off in their own apartment, he didn't have the kind of access to her that would allow him to get his lust fulfilled. He thought it hard. He was trying to plan, and he was thinking about ways to manipulate, and he was trying to get access to her. And he found out that because of the way that this palace was set up, and the way that the court was set up, and the way that guards and those that worked in the palace were set up, it was just difficult for him to be able to find a way to get him and her alone to do what he wanted to do. It's not saying that he had second thoughts. That's not what it's saying. And verse 3 says, but Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab. There had been tons of messages preached about Amnon had a friend. And sometimes those messages even come across like Amnon didn't have any decision-making power here. Now, Jonadab was Amnon's cousin. It says here, it doesn't actually say, yeah, it does. It says in verse 3, but Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimei. That's Shammah back in 1 Samuel. It talks about, I believe he's the third born of Jesse. But it says Jonadab was the son of Shimei, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. So these two are friends. They're also cousins. So because Jonadab is related to the family, he's probably got easier access into the palace. And the Bible talks about he's a very subtle man. Now Jonadab, later on, way later on into the story, you find out Shimei had another son named Jonathan, and he was a warrior. He was a great fighter and a great man. The Bible records something that he did there later on. But this son, Jonadab, it says, was a very subtle man. He knew how to work scenarios. Don't miss how he's about to work this scenario. Okay, I'm going to explain a few things about this family that we can deduce from the character that's displayed from David throughout his story. So Jonadab comes in. He's aware of the family. He knows how the family works. His dad is David's brother. He's probably heard all kinds of family stories. And it tells us he's a very subtle man. He knows how to manipulate, and he knows how to turn things a certain way. He knows how to problem solve to get what he wants. And he said unto him, Jonadab says unto Amnon, why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? You're the king's son. You got all the food that you want, and you're laying down making yourself sick, not eating, throwing a little fit. We see way into the future here, King Ahab does the same thing when he can't have the garden that's connected to the palace. He throws himself down and he won't eat, and he kind of throws this little fit because he can't get what he wants. And that's what Amnon's doing here. He wants something that is not his, that he shouldn't have, that's wrong, but he wants it so bad, he's just throwing his own little fit about it. He's having a little child temper tantrum and getting all worked up about it. And Jonadab somehow catches this process and comes to him and goes, you're the king's son. What in the world's going on with you? Why are you lean from day to day? He says, wilt thou not tell me? He said, tell me what's going on. And I'm sure he probably didn't say it this way. The Bible records that he's a subtle man, but he's probably saying, I can help you solve these problems. Whatever's bothering your heart, whatever's troubling your heart, I can get in here and I can help you. So he says, why art thou lean from day to day, wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And verse 5 says, and Jonadab said unto him, lay thee down on thy bed. Now Jonadab, again, he is fully aware of how this family, the ins and outs, the behaviors, the personalities, and because of his subtleness, he is about to use all of this knowledge to help Amnon get what he wants. Jonadab doesn't care about Amnon. You find out later in the story, we'll eventually get to, we won't get to it tonight, but in the latter half of chapter 13, we find out Jonadab almost pretty much turns on Amnon. So he comes and he gives Amnon this idea. He says, lay thee down on thy bed and make thyself sick. So first, Amnon was sick. He literally was sick. Now Jonadab's saying, hey, continue that process. Just continue to make it look like you're sick. Amnon's not sick anymore, but Jonadab goes, this is good. We can use this. We can use this for us. So lay down and continue to make yourself sick. He says, and when thy father cometh to see thee, that is so important. When thy father cometh to see thee. My understanding, and I could be wrong here, and if I'm wrong, I guess it's not the end of the world, but my understanding here on this scenario, when thy father cometh to see thee, it was kings were not known to venture around the palace to go see their children. They were known to organize militarily. They were known to give orders to the kingdom. They were known to enact laws. They were known to, you continue to read about these kings, what you'll find out is they are busy undoing what the previous king did, whether the previous king was good or bad. The new king usually starts out undoing what the previous one did. We still see that today with our presidents. As soon as one president of a different party becomes president, they spend their first couple weeks just trying to undo, no matter whether we agree with it or not. And so this king, David, he very much is a man who understands relationships. You can go back and study the way he behaved himself with Saul. the way he developed this friendship and behaved himself with Jonathan. You could go back and read about the way he conducted himself with Abigail. You can go back and see how David handled himself when he said, is there not one of the house of Saul, the house of Jonathan, the house of Saul that I can show kindness to? David, he had this, when the Bible talks about he was a man after God's own heart, there was this love that he had for people and this kindness that he showed to people. And even though he made a grave, terrible, sinful mistake with Bathsheba and Uriah. I even hate to use the word mistake. It was a terrible crime and sin. It still didn't change part of the character of David, that his personality was these deep, friendly relationships. And so David made it part of his process to come around and visit his children. And Jonadab was aware of this. Jonadab, being subtle, understanding personalities and understanding situations and understanding how to help Amnon get what he wanted, used everything around him to enable Amnon to accomplish sin. And so he says, we know your dad comes around to see you every now and then. So when the king comes by, he cares about you, and he's going to say, what in the world's wrong with you? So we know that's going to happen. So go ahead and lay down and make yourself sick and just wait for him to come and show up. And so let me read verse 5 again. It says, and Jonadab said unto him, lay thee down on thy bed and make thyself sick. And when thy father cometh to see thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come and give me meat and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it and eat it at her hand. Another point of note. Why is Tamar good at, from what I pick up on that verse, Tamar must have been a really good cook. Why is she a good cook? She's the king's daughter. They've got all kinds of servants. They've got people who can do all of this stuff for them. That was part of being the king and the king's family and the king's entourage. We've got people that can do all that stuff. Jonadab was aware that the king came by to see his children. Jonadab was aware of the talents that everyone had. He knew, and I'm telling you, this is a strange thing for Jonadab to say. Don't miss this, because the king's daughter would have had somebody that would have combed her hair. She would have had somebody that picked her clothes out. She would have had somebody that made her bed. She would have had somebody that cooked her food. But Jonadab, being a subtle man, there's a whole sermon in here about this, but that's not the point tonight. I'm just walking through the verses right now. Jonadab, being a subtle man, was aware of personalities and situations and talents and people and places and times, and he used all of that. He used all of it. Manipulator, deceitful. He's helping Amnon get what he wants. And he says, when your dad comes by, tell him, when he, I'm sick, can you send Tamar in here to make me some food? Why? Let's suppose for a second Tamar doesn't know how to cook. Let's suppose that for a second, which is a really crazy thing to suppose, since Amnon's coming up with this idea to say that to his dad. But why wouldn't they have somebody else bring something in? Why wouldn't they have one of the servants come in and cook, or one of the, I hate to use this word, I don't think it necessarily worked like this, but the head chef come in? Why wouldn't they have somebody that was doing that on a regular basis come in and make that food? It's all part of the plan for Jonadab to get Tamar and Amnon alone with each other. So he says, tell your dad, send Tamar in to make this meat. Verse 6 says, so Amnon lay down and made himself sick. He's not really sick anymore. Now he's making himself sick. If you look back in verse number 2, it says he was so vexed that he fell sick. But now he's making himself sick. So whether that means he's just choosing not to eat, where before he was so upset that he just even think about food. But whatever the case is, now it's a ploy. Now there's a mode that's happening here to start a process that will get him to what he wants. So Amnon lay down and he made himself sick. And when the king was come to see him, Amnon said to the king, I pray thee, let Tamar my sister come, and make me a couple of cakes. I don't know if he talked like that. I just hear it that way in my brain. I just hear this whiny, mediocre male wanting his sin so bad that he's willing to play this weakling, fledgling of a man, and he is really playing it up. And he says, let Tamar, my sister, come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat at her hand. Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, go now to thy brother Amnon's house and dress him meat. Jonadab's gone. Jonadab's laid out the whole scenario. Amnon did not have to listen to him. He did not have to listen to him. Sometimes when I hear people talk about Jonadab, it's almost like Amnon didn't have a choice. But he did. Every step of the way he had a choice. And sometimes we act like we don't have decision-making power. We act like we weren't able to say no to that sin. Like the decision-making power is just removed. The decision-making power is always there. You have the ability to say no. You have the ability to say yes. But the flesh is strong, and it wants what it wants. And when you're quenching the spirit, it becomes much harder to say no. That's why it's important we continue to walk with the Lord. And when those thoughts come into our mind, we just immediately turn them over to God. When those feelings come into our heart, we say they shouldn't be there, and we turn them over to God. That's a spiritual habit we start to create within ourselves to do those things. So David sent home to Tamar, saying, go down to thy brother Amnon's house and dress him meat. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was laid down. And she took flour and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and did bake the cakes. Now, I don't know what this really means. Amnon, he requested meat. I had somebody ask me one time about, well, he wanted meat, but she made bread. Well, for whatever it's worth, I don't know the answer to that, but that first word meat in verse number 5, actually in other places throughout the Bible is interpreted as bread. So take that for what you will. Whatever the case is, she comes in to make him some food. And verse 9 says, and she took a pan and poured them out before him. This is that whole part of that cooking skill that she had, which is really crazy that she had that skill because she was the king's daughter. They had people who did that, but she's got her own pots and pans. She took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, have out all men from me. And they went out, every man from him. So now he's got her here. There's still people that are probably in this. I don't know if when we think of apartment, we're thinking of like it's of its own entity. But there's probably an apartment, and then there's probably a room that we're going to see that goes back into where his bedroom is. But now he's got men in here, whether they're guards or whether they're friends or whatever the scenario is, he's got people in there. And he says, I want everybody out. And so it says in verse number 9, he said, took a pan, poured him. He have all men out from me, and they went out, every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, bring the meat into the chamber. There's that word meat again. I just think it's interchangeable with that bread there. But bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her, and said unto her, come lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not this folly. Now these words are super important here. Do not this folly. And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools. In Jewish history and culture, they connected the idea of criminal activity and foolish behavior. She is communicating to him that what he's about to do is a crime. Not just that it's foolish, but that it is a crime. Now watch this. You go back to the law that was given. I'm trying to remember right now where it was at. I want to say Deuteronomy 18, but I could be mistaken about that. But back when the law was given, it was specifically laid out for brothers and sisters, once the law was given, to not marry each other. So when she talks about this being a foolish thing to do, that She's literally saying this is a crime that you're committing. Because the law has been given to us and we know what God has said once He gave it to us. Once He gave it to us, we were fully aware. And now what you're doing is wrong and it's a crime against God. That word folly and that word fools. Folly in verse 12, fools in verse 13. She said, you're going to be like one of the fools of Israel. Now, therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Now, I talked about that part last week. Personally, I think there's something in there that she knew the king wasn't going to give her to him. Because, as I just said, it was laid out in the law for sisters and brothers, forbidden for them to marry. So, when I read that verse, one of the things that sometimes it's hard for me, maybe it's not hard for you, but sometimes hard for me, is to understand culturally what was happening then. Because their culture is extremely different than ours. Extremely different. There's things I believe wholeheartedly I miss every time I read the Bible because I'm not Jewish. Because I'm not fully aware of their culture. But what I do see when I see this, because I reconcile this with sisters and brothers are forbidden to marry each other. I see her in the moment trying to submit some type of idea because all of the men have left. She's got no one to cry out to. I see her in the moment trying to get away from this abusive man who wants to have his way with her. So she says, and I tried to address this last week, but she's bringing out the proper authority. Maybe when I talk about the king, he'll remember his dad, and maybe he'll think about how he doesn't want to disappoint his dad, or maybe when I say he won't withhold me from thee, this idea that he has in his mind will cause him to maybe want to ask somebody or want to go about it a different way, so I'll be able to get away from him and never have to be in his presence again. I can go be safe in the king's daughter's apartment where all the virgins stay. She says, I pray thee, speak with the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. He just decided, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm going to do what I want. Doesn't that sound familiar? Don't we go back to David? When somebody says this isn't your wife and he says, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm more powerful, I'm at the very least, I'm in a position of being more powerful, and I can have and do what I want. This is the terrible part about leadership in general, is that it's humanity. Humans are the ones in leadership. We don't put cats and dogs in leadership. We don't put rhinos and hippos in leadership. We put humans in leadership. And humans are fallen creatures. They're fallen beings. And because sin has a way of running our lives, ruining our lives, and ruling our lives, because sin has the capacity to do that, every one of us is capable at any moment of doing the darkest deeds we ever thought possible. Genesis chapter 34, Judges chapter 19. If you're not familiar with those passages, they look a whole lot like this passage. Amnon's not the only one who's ever done this. So he's stronger than her. And he wants what he wants, and he's going to have it. So he forced her, and he lay with her. Then, verse 15, Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. Now let me just say this. Personally, I don't think he loved her. I think he lusted after her. And I get what the Bible's saying. I'm not trying to correct the Bible. I'm just saying that's not the kind of love that God shows us. That's not the kind of love that we're called to when we stand before God and men and say, I do to our spouses. That's not the kind of love that we offer to someone that is our child. This is a lustful, and again, I hate to use the word love, and I don't think it's wrong. I just understand that there's a lust that he has in his heart. And that lust, as strong as it was, and as powerful as it was, now he hates her more than when that powerful feeling of lust that he thought was love was consuming him and making him fall upon his bed and become sick, and listening to his cousin and his friend Jonadab come in and say, I've got a whole plot on how you can get what you want. And all of these things have culminated. And in this one moment of release, all of a sudden, all of that turns into remorse. And he begins to hate her more than all of the feelings and emotions and the power that he had. Boy, if men could just see this. If men who, for whatever reason, being a sorry, low-down, dirty, rotten scoundrel of a dog, look across and say, boy, she looks better than my wife. Or think, boy, if I could just have one moment of this emotional fling with this lady at my office. Or if I could just, there, no matter what the world may offer us in beauty, what our spouses have, if they're saved, born-again believers in Christ, what our spouses have in the beauty of holiness that rests within them, the world and the strange woman and all of those things will never be able to offer us. This momentary, fleeting feeling will never give to us what we think it's going to give to us. It reminds me a lot today of men who will go on the internet and find pornography and watch it, and then the moment they have fulfilled their lust, they immediately, the very next step is they go clear their internet browsing history. Or they go wipe whatever app they're using to access that pornography. Just as soon as the deed is done, now they want it gone. They don't want it anywhere around them, so they go to wipe all that away. So Amnon hated her. And he says to her, arise and be gone. Now, I'm taking a really long time to explain this. And I don't know if I'm actually going to finish this sermon tonight. But I just need you to understand the scenario. So Amnon says unto her, arise and be gone. And she said unto him, there is no cause. There is no cause for you to do this. This evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. Why is she saying this? Remember when I talked earlier about the law that said, you are not to marry your brother and your sister. That was given at one point. Maybe it was different when God started with Adam and Eve, but now when the law had come, there was a change. So she says here, the evil in sending me away is greater than the other that thou didst unto me. What is she saying? Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 27 through 29. You can go back and read those passages. This is a really hard passage to understand. But that passage is telling us that if a man rapes a virgin, which she was, then legally, and he was caught, if he was caught, and it was proven, legally, he had to repay her father 50 shekels. Not only did he have to repay her father 50 shekels, but he was then required to marry her. Not only did he have to repay her father 50 shekels and then was required to marry her, then he had absolutely no grounds for ever getting divorced. Even if she cheated on him, no matter what happened, he was never allowed to get a divorce. You go back and read that passage, Deuteronomy 22, verses 27 to 29. It'll explain all that to you. So she's saying, you did this thing to me. You're supposed to take me to wife now. You're supposed to come and take me to be your wife, and now you've taken this precious thing in my virginity and my purity, you've stolen it away, and you're going to see here in a moment, these clothes that she's wearing indicate who she is and what she has, but now you've stolen this thing away, and now I have no chance of ever getting married. Now this hope that I had of getting married one day and starting a family and being pure for my husband, no man will ever want me. And now there is no cause for you to do this to me. You took what you wanted and you had your way with me. And now what you're doing is even worse than what you did before because nobody will ever want me. And you're legally responsible to come and take me to be your wife and to keep me because nobody will ever want me. Interesting thought why the man was never allowed to get a divorce. Might just be my Western culture thinking, but I just thought to myself, I thought maybe so that the wife had some way to get back at him for the rest of his life and just ruin his life as much as she could. I don't. Maybe that's just me being vindictive. I know the Bible says, "Vengeance is mine; thus saith the Lord, I will repay." But that part of it I've never fully understood. So she says to him, you've done to me now worse than what you did to me when you raped me. It says at the end of verse 16, but he would not hearken unto her. Then he called his servant that ministered unto him. She wouldn't get out. She's begging for him to keep her, and she won't get out. All of the men that he had, first of all, removed from the room, now he's calling them back in. And he calls his servant that ministered unto him and said, Put now this woman out from me and bolt the door after her. Now the men had left. Don't miss this. The men had left. So when they come back in, they probably had seen some type of struggle that had gone on. They probably had seen that she was very somber and that he was very upset. And they probably put two and two together that there was an intimate relationship that happened. And they probably, this is just the way it works with men. Men tend to always accuse women before they accuse men. They probably thought to themselves, oh, he wants her out. She wants to stay. And he wants to bolt the door after her. I bet she tried to take advantage of him because she's a beautiful woman. I bet that's what she did. Blows my mind that we think like that. The Bible also says it's foolish to answer a matter before you hear the whole matter. But I'll let that sit there. But he called his servant, verse 17, called his servant that ministered unto him and said, put now this woman out from me, and bolt the door after her. And she had a garment of diverse colors upon her. For with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. This garment was an indicator that she had something that was precious and valuable. Virginity and purity is no longer precious and valuable. It is now, let's remove as much clothing as possible. Let's change our genders. Let's change who we are. Let's change all this stuff. And let's not do it the way God said. And let's not perform it the way God said. And let's not be who God told us to be. But she was still holding on to this in this time. And she's got this garment on. And then his servant brought her out and bolted the door after her, just like Amnon said. And Tamar put ashes on her head and rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her and laid her hand on her head and went out crying. Now, I heard somebody one time talk about she laid her hand on her head like this. I don't think so. I think we get that from like old 50s movies. Oh, I don't know where that came from. I think she's in such pain and turmoil. This is an outward display that was normal throughout Jewish culture to say, my life is in turmoil right now. And so what she did, I think, when it says she laid her hand on her head, I picture more, and maybe I'm wrong, but I picture her more going out like this. Her hands are on her head and she's trying to understand what just happened and why it happened and what that means for her future. And nobody thinks about this. And I'm going to get my way and do my thing. And we're not worried about how this is going to affect somebody else long term. But she runs out crying. Verse 20, and Absalom her brother said unto her, hath Amnon... See, Absalom he comes in and he sees this. And somehow he put two and two together. Maybe it didn't take long for gossip to spread within the inner court in the palace. Maybe somebody had told him. Maybe he figured it out on his own. I don't know. But Amnon thy brother been with thee? Has Amnon thy brother been with thee? But hold now thy peace, my sister. He is thy brother. Regard not this thing. This just sounds like some other man trying to come in and fix a deal. Don't worry about it. She was raped. Don't worry about it. She had something stolen from her. Don't worry about it. Absalom's going to try to take and solve this problem because David won't. But he's going to go about it the wrong way. But he tells her, regard not this thing. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. Notice she did not go back to the virgins' apartments. She did not go back to where the king's daughters stayed. Now Absalom's going to take her in. Great picture here. I don't know that you could say Absalom did too many things right, but great picture here about a brother taking another brother's wife here and taking care of her after the brother dies and passes on. I see a great picture of that. Absalom probably thinking he's going to be dead soon. But when King David, verse 21, when King David heard all of these things, he was very wroth. And Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon, because he had forced his sister Tamar. Now, David is not recorded as doing anything. It says he's very upset. This is where the bad example hampered him. This is where everybody understanding and knowing what happened with Bathsheba and Uriah kept him from solving problems. How is he going to go and execute judgment and legality upon Amnon when God didn't even do that with him? God did not execute judgment and legality upon David. And God could have killed him. Legally, God could have killed him. But God didn't do that. So now David is hampered and almost cut down by his bad example. How can I go and try to solve this problem when I did this over here? The bad example keeps him. This is why it's so important that we don't set... Now listen, all of us are fallen people, okay? All of us are sinners. We're either sinners or we're sinners saved by grace. So all of us are going to set a bad example on some level. We're talking about major issues here. We're talking about things that are world-changing, life-changing, family-breaking issues. Generational curse-having issues. David was very wroth, but he couldn't do anything. The bad example, it kept him from doing anything. Absalom, we'll find out next week, Absalom comes up with a plan to solve this problem. And he has to wait a couple of years before he does it. But it says Absalom spake neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated it. He did, and that neither good nor bad doesn't mean he was short. He just didn't talk to him at all. He found out some way to avoid him in the hallways in the palace. He found out some way to avoid him on the battlefield out in the city. He figured out how to avoid him, and he didn't talk to him. He didn't want to see him. He didn't want to talk to him. And for years, this is going to boil inside of Absalom. Now, boy, that took a while to get through. We're about 40 minutes into it. I am going to show you these 4 points. And I'm going to go through them probably faster than I want to go. Maybe I should take longer because it's recorded, but I don't want this to be something that is forever tonight. Self-control in an addicted world. And let me just say that addiction is an addiction to sin. You can list a whole bunch of things in that sin category, but it is an addiction of our flesh to sinful appetites. Self-control in an addicted world. First of all, remorse over sin makes you want to run away. Notice what happened. Now, this is where we're trying to communicate why you should avoid the sinful appetite in doing what is about to destroy your life and your home and your family and your marriage, and possibly even your church and your testimony at work and maybe even the community. Why you should avoid those sins. There's going to be remorse that comes in. The first thing that happens with Amnon, I want you to see how it affects the whole family. I've got one of these for the four main characters in this story. Amnon, Tamar, Absalom, and David. Notice how this sin affects them. Remorse makes you want to, first of all, run away. My head's right on that word right there. Sorry about that. But it says, Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred wherewith he hated her was greater than the love wherewith he had loved her. And Amnon said unto her, Arise, be gone. He wanted to run away from that situation. Boy, I sure thought that was going to be more enjoyable than what it was. I sure thought that I was going to get more enjoyment out of that. It was going to last longer, and it was going to be more fun, and it was going to be more pleasurable. But, once it was all over with, I hated her. I hated myself. I hated the situation. Why did Jonadab tell me to do all that stuff? And he wanted to run away. He wanted to get away from that situation. He did not want any more part of that situation. In fact, unless you can find it somewhere else, I can't find that he ever even tried to interact with Tamar ever again. Absalom does have a daughter later on. He names her Tamar. But first of all, what does remorse over sin make you want to do? It makes you want to run away. Secondly, notice what happened with Tamar. It made her want to repress her emotions. Notice in verse 18, she had a garment of diverse colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Notice this. I don't have it on the screen, but verse 19, it wasn't until she had gotten away from Amnon's presence that she actually, verse 19, and Tamar put ashes on her head and rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her. That was after the servant came in and pushed her out. Why didn't she do it before? Why didn't she do it in front of the man that had raped her? Why didn't she do it in front of the man? Because she did not want to reveal what was really going on in her heart. She was trying to be strong in the moment. She was trying to figure out why is she even here. She's trying to figure out why two men, Jonadab and Amnon, had put together this idea and this ploy to have his way with her. She's trying to figure out, well, what in the world just happened? And I'm sure over time, and probably immediately, she connected a lot of the dots. But over time, she figured out more and more. But she did not put the ashes on her head, and she did not tear her garment, and she did not cry holding her head while she was in his presence. I don't know how many times I have heard some police story, whether it's a television program or whether it's some other real world scenario where a rape victim doesn't know how to process their emotions immediately. And usually, not always, I'm not a psychologist on this, but it's what my personal experience has been that I've heard more often than not, that they finally almost break down once they're alone, where they can let their guard down. They've been so violated that all they have in that initial fight or flight mode is to put up a really strong front. And so this sin It caused Amnon to want to run away from the situation, but it caused Tamar to repress these emotions and not deal with them properly. And why should she even have to deal with it? I can't believe I'm even saying this about this scenario. Deal with them properly. How do you deal with these emotions from this scenario properly? How do you even deal with them properly? This is such a dark and terrible place in the Bible, that things that have happened. And she runs out, and once she gets alone in verse 19, she put ashes on her head, she rent her garment, and then she put her hands on her head, and she went out crying. It wasn't till she left his presence. She was repressing all of those emotions. And boy, I hate to get too far or too deep into that whole act right there, but there's a part of me that just wonders, while he's in the process of the raping act, if she's just trying to think to herself, it says he was stronger than her. She's just trying to think to herself, just let it be over. Just let it be over. Just hurry up and be over. Just let this be over. What a terrible, terrible thing for her, and how sin has affected her. None of this is her fault. None of this is her fault. Thirdly, notice remorse over sin makes you want to resent yourself. David was very wroth. He was very, very upset with this situation, but he didn't know how to do anything about it. Why? If you're looking for counseling on marriage, I sure hope you don't go online and Google who's been divorced more than anybody else so I can talk to them. I hope when you find somebody to talk to about the marriage problems you have, you don't go and find somebody who's been divorced 10, 20, 30 times. I hope that if you're looking for advice on parenting, you don't go to somebody who's been in jail for a few years because they beat their children so bad. Okay? You don't do that because they're a bad example. And the bad example, if they were to even tell you anything, it wouldn't hold any weight at all. Andrew and I found this out when we had Luke. When he was first born, all of a sudden I started getting all this advice about parenting. It's like, where is all this coming from? Everybody wants to tell us how to do all this stuff. And you know what was funny was all of the people who told me about how to be a good parent were not people that I wanted to tell me about how to be a good parent. And the people that I wished would have told me about how to be a good parent, they wouldn't tell me how to be a good parent. That's what was so funny about that scenario. Andrew and I talked many times. Our closest friends at church or wherever, they wouldn't even begin to. They probably had gone through the same thing right there, but they wouldn't even begin to. And even if I'd asked, they'd almost kind of hem-haw around and eventually go, "Well, the Lord's going to have to give you direction on that or whatever." But I mean, people who've been divorced and whose kids were wayward and maybe even done terrible things and in jail or whatever, boy, they were real quick to snap all kinds of opinions out there and tell us exactly what we were supposed to do. I didn't listen to them because what they said to me held no weight. It didn't have any value. But when someone who kids had all grown and they loved the Lord, I'm not talking about having perfect kids. I'm not talking about having perfect kids. I'm talking about kids. My kids aren't perfect. Your kids aren't perfect. There are no perfect kids. There's no perfect parents. We're not talking about perfect kids. We're talking about kids who have a testimony and a habit of honoring the Lord in their lives. I want to know how they did that. I think Job, outside of God the Father, is the greatest dad in the whole Bible. I want to know how he got them kids to have lunch every day. How did he create a relationship with them that they're going to one of the brothers' house every day of the week and eating together? How did he do that? That's the man I want to know from. And for whatever reason, the Bible doesn't tell me. But David couldn't talk to Amnon about his sin because David did the same thing. He went and took a woman that wasn't his. And whether or not you want to say he forced her or Bathsheba was in on it, I think Bathsheba played a part in that. But whatever the case was, that woman wasn't his. And she was already married. And he forced himself. And then once he finds out she's pregnant, he goes into cover-up mode and figures out how to kill Uriah. Hires a hitman literally to murder him. How's David going to... Amnon knows that this has happened. How's David going to go, "Now, Amnon, you shouldn't have done this." And Amnon's going to sit there and go, "Hypocrite. What about what you did?" Hypocrite. The bad example hampers your ability to influence your family. You cannot influence because the bad example... And again, we're not talking about being imperfect. We're talking about a bad example that is family destroying, mind altering. We're talking about things that you can't get past. We're not talking about locking your keys in your car. We're talking about this kind of behavior, that your children lose respect for you and your bad example, it won't let you go do anything about it, and you resent yourself. He's angry. He's not just angry about what Amnon did. He's angry because he can't address the situation properly. And he wants to. Lastly, Absalom. Remorse over sin makes you want to reject family. I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say, well, I'd go to the family reunion, but so-and-so is there. So-and-so is there. I don't really want to have to deal with them. Notice what it says. Absalom spake unto his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon. He hated him. It tells us why he hated him, but we know why he hated him. Because he forced his sister Tamar. We know why he hated him. Remorse over sin makes you want to run away. It makes you want to repress emotions. It makes you want to resent yourself. And it makes you want to reject your family. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. That porn you're watching right now is eventually going to be found out. You're not going to be good enough to hide it forever. That emotional relationship that you have with that lady at your office is eventually going to go further than you think it's going to go. Those little flirts and those little eye darts that happen, that's going to take you somewhere you don't know. You think it's all playful and all fun and games and nobody knows, but the Lord knows, and you know, and she knows, and it starts with those things. And sin, when it's finished, bringeth forth death. And your whole life is going to be destroyed because you valued the beauty of the world over what God gave you in a born-again believer of a wife and the beauty of holiness that rests within her. The beauty of holiness. What price can you put on the beauty of holiness? There's no price you can put on that. The beauty of holiness. We don't value the beauty of holiness. Holiness, well, that almost makes me feel uncomfortable. Isn't holiness a Pentecostal term? Well, it shouldn't be. It should be a Bible term. Holiness. Holiness. God is holy. Be ye holy, for I am holy. Remorse over sin makes you want to run away, makes you want to repress emotions, makes you resent yourself, and it makes you reject your family. Well, I guess that screen right there tells us we're at the end of the slideshow. I meant to have a couple more slides right there. But whatever the case is, thank you for watching. I didn't get to everything I wanted to get to tonight. I know it was a whole lot to cover, but Lord bless you. Thank you so much. And again, if you have any thoughts or concerns or rebukes or anything like that, feel free to, you can see me, you can call down to church, you can email me. All of those numbers, information are on previous slideshows and will be on the next one. Sorry I missed this last slide right here. But anyways, Lord bless you. Have a good night. And as Brother George always says, consider these things. Consider them. Think about them. I don't know how many times I've heard men say, I just wasn't thinking. Think about it. God bless you.